So now that we are in the final season of Year 8 of Rainbow Six Siege, it is time that I teach you the complete Year 8 story to set you up going into Year 9. This is going to cover everything from the introduction of Deimos to our 4 operators who came throughout the year, through all the comic books, battle pass lore. Every single thing we got in this year is going to be in this video. This is going to be the complete video you need to watch before you go into Year 9 of Rainbow Six Siege, and I will also be making an entire updated lore video when the Year 9 cinematic comes out in February. Also, this video takes so much effort to make, so if you are new here and do enjoy, hit that sub button. It's free. Drop a like, drop a comment, it really helps with the algorithm, and let's get into this. So at the beginning of Year 8, it has been an entire year since Nighthaven, a private military that once worked with Rainbow, broke their ties and went back to being on their own. As well as this, multiple Rainbow operators would officially leave Rainbow and go to work with Nighthaven. These operators were Smoke, Pulse, Ella, Finka, and IQ. After Rainbow was a little bit shaken up by operators leaving as well as Nighthaven's departure, Harry, the director of Rainbow, also known as Six, would restructure how the team operates, separating all the operators into 4 separate squads, each with a team captain. The first squad is Wolfguard. This is a humanitarian squad with the team captain of Doc. Next up we have Viperstrike. This is a support and versatility squad with the team captain of Hibana. We then have redhammer, which is the brute force squad with the team captain of Thermite. And finally we have ghosteyes. This is the stealth and undercover squad with the team captain of Kaze. So over this span of a year, which leads to the beginning of Year 8, these 4 squads were developed. And that brings us to the big cinematic at the beginning of Year 8 closing session. So Rainbow have learned that Nighthaven weaponry has fallen into the black market and is being sold to criminals around the world. They get word that there is an arms deal happening at an abandoned facility, and multiple operators get dispatched to intercept this deal. Captain Thermite of the redhammer squad is deployed on this mission, bringing along 2 of his own operators, Ash and Sledge. This is also a joint operation with the ghosteyes squad, with Captain Kaze being in this mission alongside one of her operators, Zofia. At first, this seems to be a standard mission of some low-level criminal gang purchasing some stolen Nighthaven weaponry, and it's a pretty easy walk in the park for Rainbow. However, this is when we learn that Harry, the director of Rainbow, is at his home in Oxford, England, and it is here where he is met by a strange masked figure who has entered his house, who then presents him with a live feed of this operation happening. Cutting back to our operators on this operation, they take out these enemies with ease, and that is when they find the stolen Nighthaven gear, which they are going to extract. However, that is when Ash and Thermite find out that this building has been rigged with explosives, and all of this was a trap. Thermite, Ash, and our other operators try to leave the building, however, they are all caught in the blast, and the live feed goes dead. This is when we cut back to Harry and this mysterious figure who we learn is named Deimos. This is when we learn from Deimos that he is an ex-Rainbow operator, and he thinks Rainbow is a joke, claiming that they used to be feared in his time. He claims that Harry disgraced his unit, and what comes next is the squad's fall. Every operator dies. And in the closing moments of this cinematic, Deimos kills Harry. So not long after this, the rest of Rainbow will learn what happened. 5 of their operators have been injured, their director is dead, and they have a new enemy. But Rainbow will not take long to retaliate. Viperstrike, the squad led by Captain Hibana, will gain intel about one of Deimos' cargo planes, and Captain Hibana, alongside one of her operatives Capitao, and her brand new recruit Brava, who is also the cousin of Capitao, will sneak on board this flight. It is here where we get our first glimpse at some of Deimos' soldiers, of an organization we don't yet know. Hibana wants to take Deimos in alive, however, after what he'd done to Harry, Capitao wants him dead. It's on this cargo plane as well, we can see some of the stuff in which Deimos has. There's a lot of money, gold bars, and other resources. As well as this, Deimos is aboard this flight and heads to the front of the plane. So to take out the enemies around them, Brava uses her clutch drone to hack one of the armored vehicles which is stationary on this plane. She gains control of the weapons and takes out the soldiers on board. Hibana uses her Cairo pellets to blast open the door to the front of the plane, and this is when Deimos emerges. Deimos, with no regard for his soldiers' lives, open up the cargo doors, and many of his resources and soldiers fall out of the plane. In the process, Hibana gets knocked back, hits into one of these cargo crates, and becomes unconscious. Capitao will also lose his footing and start to fall out the plane. That is when he is saved by Brava, holding him by one hand, and also supporting herself with a rope. However, this is when Brava gets put in a perfect position to take out Deimos. But this leaves her in a bad decision. Either let go of Capitao and let him fall to his death, or hold on to him and let Deimos escape. She understandably chooses the latter, and chooses to save her cousin Capitao over killing Deimos. Deimos manages to escape, and that is when Hibana regains consciousness. Hibana notes that although Deimos escaped, they did manage to hurt his operation, cause all of his cargo and soldiers that were on the plane are now gone. However, this isn't the end. We next move over to the battle pass for Operation Commanding Force, with this little bit titled First Blood. And it says the following from the perspective of Brava. There's no other way to say this. Deimos got the better of Viperstrike. He got the better of me. I'm not sure any of us have ever faced an enemy of his caliber. One who seems to know our every move before we make it. As long as he's out there, people will die. Deimos set his sights on Rainbow, killing one, injuring many. If I had stuck to the mission, Capitao would have been gone too. We have to remain vigilant, or this could be the end of Rainbow. Deimos has mercenaries, vehicles, artillery, financing. This is not a one-man operation. Someone knows something. A weakness we can exploit, an asset we can destroy, a plan we can prepare for. We just need to find one thing and we can win. I won't rest until he's brought to justice. None of us will. Next, let's go deeper into the battle pass and look at all the little pieces of lore which we can find in it. Firstly, we have Azami talking about Yahata. Of course, Yahata was the person who was assassinated, and Azami was his private bodyguard, and she was friends with him on a personal level as well. And she says that Yahata told me he didn't want to be seen as a snake. Ironic that I have now become one to avenge his death. And that is because she is part of Viperstrike, and a snake is a big part of the name and logo. Azami also says, I was promised vengeance. When the time comes, I won't hesitate to take the shot. And there's also a bit from Brava talking to Azami, and she says, if we're going to take him down, we should do it by the book. This is not time for vigilante justice, Azami. So it does seem like there's a little bit of turmoil between Brava and Azami, since Azami is saying if she was in that situation, she would have taken the shot. But then you have to consider, would that have been worth taking the life of Capitao? Here we have a bit from Brava talking about Hibana, and she says, Hibana is a leader who focuses on what can be done, not on who to blame. How does she stay so calm with everything going on? There's also a little bit by Hibana saying, gear for any opportunity. Ground, air, or sea. Wherever Deimos surfaces next, we'll be ready. Next we have a little bit from Jaeger talking about Mira. We don't really get to see much of Jaeger in the lore. And what he says, Mira pretends she's tired of seeing me in the workshop, yet she keeps asking me to review these prototypes. I think she misses the camaraderie. And we have another one talking about Mira, this time Hibana, and she says, it's time to get out of the lab, Mira. The squad needs you. I need you. It is quite interesting because it seems like Mira is going to have more of a hands-on role, since for the most part in the lore, she has been in the lab developing new technology. Next we have one Mira talking about her new uniform, and it says, different color, same outfit. Some variables are better left alone, to make space for what needs to change. We have a little simple one by Hibana, and it says, breathe in, breathe out, focus on the target. She's a background in archery, so it seems like she takes that same philosophy into her gunfights. Next up, we have a little bit from Capitao, and he says, Hibana pushed for this operation. Without her, we wouldn't have been on that plane, and the money would still be in Deimos' hand. We have another small little quote from Hibana, and it said, the Viperstrike is fast and deadly. Admirable qualities. Just giving a little insight as to why it was called Viperstrike. Next up, we have one from Maestro, and this one is a little bit important. It says, Deimos made it personal when he hurt Seamus. That's Sledge. Hibana, let's put this fucker in the ground. I'll be waiting for your signal. And I felt like this one was quite important because although we didn't see Sledge get caught in the explosion in the cinematic itself, it does confirm that Sledge, Zofia, and Kavera were also in that explosion. And that explosion has affected other operators. Maestro and Sledge are really good friends. We know that in their story. So the fact that happened to Sledge has given even more motive for Maestro to fight back. And that is all the small pieces of lore information we got from the Commanding Force Battle Pass. The next part after this was actually the comic we got in mid-season. And this will show Viperstrike going for another attack on Deimos. This comic book starts in Hereford Military Hospital, the same place where Hereford Base is located. We can overhear Hibana and Thermite talking to each other, where Hibana says, someone planted intel in Deimos' plane, the same plane which Viperstrike just infiltrated. She says it contained the geolocation of a compound in Brazil. If there's any intel to gather, it is there. Thermite says, can it be accessed remotely? But Hibana says, no, it's completely off the grid. Brava will lead a reconnaissance operation to find out more. However, that is where Thermite shuts this down, and we learn that Ash was actually put in a coma from that explosion, and this has filled Thermite with a lot of rage. Thermite says, Hibana, that son of a bitch put Ash in a coma. comma, he killed Harry. Brava had a line of fire on Deimos and she didn't take the shot. Hibana says, I'm aware of what's at stake, Thermite. This is a Viperstrike operation. You do not get a say. Then Thermite says, new intel says Deimos is getting ready for another strike as we speak. We need a win here. And that is when Brava interrupts and says, then allow me to take point. She continues to say, sir, the clock is ticking. I know the area, the people, and how to access the compound unnoticed. With me leading, we save weeks of prep, weeks we don't have. Like you said, now or never. Thermite unwittingly agrees, meaning that Brava now has a clearance of both Thermite and Hibana. Hibana says, there you go, find us something, Brava, but be careful, this could be a trap. Thermite says, and if you see Deimos, you pull the fucking trigger. Brava responds by saying, yes, Captain, I won't make the same mistake twice. So with this intel which someone planted on Deimos' plane, it gave our operators the location of Brazil, more specifically, a city called Ouro Preto. Brava is leading a strike team alongside Jaeger and Alibi, in which they are going to infiltrate this compound. Jaeger and Brava make their way up to the compound, whilst Alibi holds back and provides support from afar. Alibi says that she is in position ready to provide cover fire, however that is when someone behind her points a gun to her head. He takes the shot, but it turns out it was a Prisma. The real Alibi was behind him and takes him out instead. However, it is now open fire and Brava and Jaeger are in a gunfight. Both Brava and Jaeger get pinned down and Brava exclaims that she needs to get into that building. Reinforcements could show up at any moment. They're putting up a good fight but they are still pinned down. Brava says if we don't get that intel, more will die by the hand of Deimos. We do whatever it takes. Brava swings a corner taking out a few enemies whilst Alibi and Jaeger provide support from behind. Brava then throws a grenade blowing up a group of hostiles. However, one of these hostiles throw a grenade back. That is when it is caught by Jaeger's ADS, then Alibi neutralizes the threat. All three of our operators claim it is clear, and they decide it's time to head into the compound. However, at this time, an explosive is making its way to the compound. This blows up the compound, and Jaeger and Brava get caught in the blast. Now, it does seem like they are uninjured, but the intel has been destroyed. At least, that's what they think. A silhouetted figure, who seems to be the one who blew up the compound, stands away in the distance. Our three operators pursue after them and hold them at gunpoint. This is when this person says, you don't want to shoot, trust me. Brava then says, give me a good reason. This figure then says, I don't know how, but they found out you were coming and laced that building with explosives. I blew it up to save your lives. Brava responds by saying, well that's a little convenient. Another option is that you knew what we were after and destroyed our intel. This is when this person says, I didn't destroy the intel. I am the intel. I'm the one who planted the geolocation. Then why all this? Why not come to us directly? Says Brava. I was stuck. Deimos, he's everywhere. It's a long story. My only option was to get your attention on this compound and hope you send a team. I can help you stop him. And with this response by that mysterious figure, we cut to what I can only assume is Hereford Base or another undisclosed Rainbow facility where we see both Captain Thermite and Captain Hibana in a room. Brava enters and Hibana says, did you find something that can help us catch Deimos? Brava responds by saying, not something, someone. Hibana, Thermite, me, and then the comic ends. We will then go on to learn that this mysterious figure is a man by the name of Emil Svensson, who will go by the codename of Fenrir. Svensson, who comes from a scientific and military background, became an outcast in every field he was in. He was really interested in neurochemistry, enrolling in as many science classes as he could back when he was in education, and after he left, he would join the Swedish Armed Forces. He was a communicator in the Special Operations Group, and he wanted to expand his skill set and aim to develop strategies that would help improve the performance of his peers. This is when he would start to pursue a project to create a formula that would alter soldiers' emotions. However, every time he pitched this, he was denied, and he was so insistent about it that it would eventually lead to him being discharged from the military. He was an outcast to his family, the scientific community, and the military community. With not a lot of options left, yet still wanting to pursue his research, this is when Fenrir gets an offer and the funding to do this research by Deimos. Now to Fenrir, this is great. There is someone who's also interested in his work, and he's given them the facility and the funding to do so. Fenrir wanted to make this to make the world a better place. However, what he didn't realize was the person funding him was using his expertise for a different intention. Whilst doing the research, there was a prototype which made anyone who inhaled it hallucinate and become extremely violent, which was simply just part of the process and a little speed bump along the way. This was not intended for use. However, when Deimos learned of this prototype, he took Fenrir out of the room, locked the doors, and unleashed it on all the other scientists. This is when Fenrir really saw what Deimos was using him for, and now Fenrir is worried that his work is in the wrong hands. Fenrir would learn more information information about Deimos and what his plan is against Rainbow. This is when Fenrir would plant the tracker on Deimos' plane, hoping that Rainbow would intercept it. And luckily, they did. Rainbow would make their way to Brazil, and this is when Fenrir would take his work and run. And this is when he would blow up the compound and intercept Viperstrike. And then, as we know, they would take him back to Rainbow. And now, although Fenrir is with Rainbow now, that doesn't mean everyone trusts him. Thermite, alongside Buck, done an extensive interview with him to make sure that he wasn't a spy for Deimos. Thermite and Buck would clear him of being a spy and do believe his intentions are good. However, that won't stop criticism from other operators, and I've made an entire video showing what operators do and don't trust Fenrir. Fenrir would tell Thermite that Deimos does not have any of this formula, and Fenrir managed to take all of it with him. And he says that he wants to help Rainbow stop Deimos. Now, Fenrir would make another prototype version that would not make people violent, rather it would just block their vision, and that is the same version we use in the game. And as well as this, Thermite would recruit him to redhammer, again to the criticism of some other operators. But Thermite sees Fenrir as a key component to taking down Deimos. And now with Fenrir's introduction, we can take a look at the battle pass for Dread Factor, which gives us some more information. Now firstly, we have a paragraph from the perspective of Fenrir, and this is titled Turncoat. He says, "I'm used to being doubted. You could say that's how Deimos got to me. He did not question my intentions or fight my ideas. He manipulated me. I did not see his shadow until it was too late, and my colleagues paid the price. How could I let it happen? That is not who I am. I had to remember that. I may not be able to undo what he did, but I can help ensure he is stopped. That's why I looked for Rainbow. My ambitions can wait. With redhammer, I can make things right, if they let me. I can't blame anyone for doubting me, or my intentions. Military service was never my priority. All I can offer is what I have. Information, experience, and an intimate relationship with fear." And in this battle pass, we get to learn a lot of more information. Firstly, we have one from Fenrir talking about Kapkan. He says, "Kapkan is one of the few who wasn't bothered by my joining. He calls me Poppy. I'm not sure if he's mocking me or being nice." Next up, we have a bit from Kapkan, and he says, "Deimos isn't hunting. He's playing with us." Alibi says, "I know a thing or two about misdirection. I'm not ready to trust Fenrir." Maestro says, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, Arya, but I do not need you mothering me. I'm fine." This could play on from the one from the previous battle pass about Sledge being injured and Maestro being upset about it. There's a little one from Thermite, which seems to be a note he sent to Twitch, and it says, "Concerns heard. Attached is one FNAT Dreadmind model. Sync with Lion and get back to me with results." We have a little quote from Fenrir, and it says, "Fear is a fascinating emotion. It stares into the core of a person and forces a choice. Grow or forever be trapped." Jackal has something to say about Fenrir. He says, "When you work with an informant, you don't give them a badge. I hope redhammer knows what they're doing." And this battle pass is quite interesting because we get the perspective of non-redhammer operators, for example Jackal, who is part of Viperstrike. We also have a little bit of Lion talking to Jackal, and he says, "Final warning, take those vacation days or I'll be knocking on your door to put you to sleep myself." And by that I can assume that Jackal is just too invested in this, and he's too busy trying to take down Deimos that he's not even taking time for himself off. We have one from Twitch, and she says, "I'd like to sit down with Fenrir, nerd to nerd, hear what his research motivations are for myself." And now we have one by Maverick saying, "Where the hell is Nook?" And this is playing into the whole story arc from last year of Grim and Nook. If you haven't seen my entire lore video, that won't really make sense to you, so definitely check that out. But it seems like Kavera directly responds to this question by saying, "Nook is on leave. I won't be answering any questions." That is because Grim found Nook's identity and threatened to leak it, so it seems like Nook is taking some time off. We have some little bits from Nighthaven as well. This one is just a fun little remark from Osa about Ace, and she says, "Credit where it's due, Hoagland's idiocy is keeping the mood light," seemingly implying that the mood in Nighthaven isn't the best. We have a little bit from Callie as well talking about the whole Deimos situation with Rainbow, and it says, "If Rainbow wants a mess, they are welcome to it. We have other business to attend to," implying that Nighthaven aren't going to get involved. We have another little bit by Osa here, and it says, "Callie doesn't like being caught off guard, and she isn't one to forget." I don't know if this is talking about Deimos taking her off guard and stealing her equipment, or ghosteyes taking her off guard on the runway. We have a little bit by Ace, and he says, "Don't tell Callie, but I'm glad Rainbow took that mission. That explosion could have damaged my moneymaker." Callie has something to say about Ash being in the coma, and she says, "Don't tap out yet, princess. We have unfinished business." Sort of implying that, yeah, although Ash and Callie pretty much hate each other, she doesn't want to see her die. And this also confirms that Ash is still in the coma at this point in time. We have a nice little one from Flores, who is a close friend of Ash, and he says, "Hey Capitana, when you wake up, I'll make you a whole buffet. Just come back to us." Next up, we have one from Oryx talking about Fenrir, and he says, "That look of isolation in Fenrir's eye, I know it all too well." That is because Oryx was held in isolation for many years of his life, and it seems like he can sympathize with Fenrir. Kaid says, "The pain of failure never fully leaves you, Thermite. Just be sure it does not cloud your judgment." As you're going to see, Kaid is one of the biggest critics of Fenrir being in redhammer. Kaid is also in redhammer, and it makes sense that Kaid is sort of contesting the leadership of Thermite, since Kaid is a leader in his own right at the fortress. Nomad has something to say about Kaid, and she says, "Kaid is an unparalleled unparalleled teacher and mentor. Don't be too quick to dismiss his wisdom. And it's interesting because Nomad and Oryx were students of Kaze, yet Oryx seems to support Fenrir and Nomad and Kaze don't. And Oryx sort of chimes in again and he says, I'm not a fan of all this infighting. At the fortress, we had a way to settle this kind of matter. Brutal, but effective. We have a little bit by Fuse talking about Fenrir, and he says, Fenrir said goodbye to Deimos by blowing up his whole compound in Brazil. What's more redhammer than that? Seeing that Fuse is showing support for Fenrir. Blackbeard has something to say about him as well, and he says, I've met a lot of nasty characters in my time. Svensson is less of a wolf and more of a runt who got left behind. Poor guy. So it seems like Blackbeard also trusts him. And this next one is quite interesting because we get our first little bit from Sledge since the explosion back at the beginning of year 8. And he says, 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and a few pieces of shrapnel lodged in my leg. Deimos should have used a bigger bomb. And can I say, as a fellow Scotsman, that is the most Scottish reply to being blown up ever. And the final little bit in this battle pass is a bit of Thorn talking about Sledge, who is one of our good friends. And she says, Sledge is as stubborn as they come. Doc told him to get some rest, but he's already out there swinging that hammer. I'm not about to play nurse. And a lot of that battle pass was really good in not only giving us info about redhammer, but a lot of the squads in total. This showed us nighthaven's perspective on Deimos, Ash is still in a coma, and Sledge's injuries, as well as other stuff. And next up we have the comic book. It seems like Fenrir has been part of Rainbow for a month or two at this point, and we see him on a mission. This comic book starts off in Costa Brava in Spain. Here we can see Fenrir, now an active member of redhammer, scoping out a location. We can hear him talking to himself in his head, and he says, 2 families, 8 hostages. Contained room with 1 point of exit, the whole way to the pier. How do we get the hostages out safely? That is when his name gets called from the distance, and we see that is Kaze. We now see that redhammer are on an operation to save hostages. Fenrir then says to himself, Kaze, great leader, doesn't like me very much. Sitrep, says Kaze. 4 hostiles, very capable. Our dialogue with them indicates they will kill hostages if necessary. No demands other than a boat out of here, says Fenrir. And back in his head, he says, why would radicals with this level of training target civilians and make no demands? That is when Captain Thermite comes over the computer and says, projected outcomes, team leader. And Kaze says, best case, 2 hostages dead. Worst case, all of them. Amara chimes in by saying, long range comms are down. Something from inside the restaurant is creating interference. Then the hostage takers come over the radio and say, hello, cops? Fenrir picks up and says, hello, this is Svensson speaking. They reply by saying, bring the boat. In his head, he's thinking, delay them. Buy time. He responds by saying, as I said earlier, these things take time. No more time. If the boat isn't here in 5 minutes, we kill a hostage, says the hostile. He dropped the connection. He'll do it, says Fenrir. Kaze says, call the boat. Grip up, it's time. Kaze starts to inform the team what's going to happen. He says, the tangos move in 5. If they make it to the pier, we lose our execution window and should expect the worst. Any last minute suggestions? Fenrir, who is still feeling guilty from his scientific colleagues being killed by Deimos, steps in and said, I have one, let's use my dread mine. No one else? I read the brief on you, Fenrir. I know what your toxin does. It's chemical warfare. We could save everyone, says Fenrir. This is a new iteration. It causes disorientation, confusion. It would provide an opening we currently don't have. And expose hostages to a chemical agent? Enlighten me as to how that aligns with Rainbow's MO, says Kaze. Fenrir responds by saying, there are no lasting harmful side effects. I tested it on myself to be sure. Please, Kaze, if there's even a remote chance this works, Kaze butts in by saying, it's still a no for me, but we're a team. What do you all think? Goyo says, I wouldn't mind if those kids still had parents at the end of the day. And Buck and Amaru agree. Kaze seems to reluctantly agree and says, then it's decided. You don't get to fail here. Understood? Yes, understood, says Fenrir. There's work to be done. Let's move. We then see our operators make their way to the building. As Oryx, Buck, Amaru, and Goyo scale the building, Fenrir and Kaze make their way around the side. That is when Kaze starts to drill a hole in the side of the building, and Fenrir places one of his dread mines inside. That is when he claims he is ready, and Kaze says, hold, here they come. As the hostiles start to take the hostages outside to make their way to the boat, the dread mine activates. Whilst the hostiles get engulfed in the hallucination gas, the rest of redhammer enter the building and take them out. This results in no hostage casualties. After the successful mission, Fenrir says, thank you, Kaze. But Kaze just simply walks away, and Fenrir says to himself, still not a fan. Then Fenrir's attention sort of shifts, and he says, there is still the mystery as to why these people were targeted. Fenrir makes his way over to a hostage and says, I'm sorry to bother you, but this is important. Did they make any requests of you or say anything unusual? I'm sorry, they threatened our kids. I had to tell them. Tell them what? I work at Yahata Data Services, specifically on the Rainbow account. I relay training information to agencies with potential operators for the program. I am so sorry. What did you tell them? I told them when the next training would happen, and where. A codename, I think. a place called Tower. With this, we move into the cinematic for Year 8 Season 3, Operation Heavy Metal, where we see our brand new Rainbow operative Ram, who is part of the redhammer squad, the same squad as Fenrir, being trained at the tower by ghosteyes operator Vigil. Similar to operators Vigil and Dokkaebi, Ram is also Korean. Now alongside Ram, we can see other recruits training on this tower. Well, this training was cut short when one of Deimos' helicopters attacks the tower. This was the information Deimos collected from that hostage situation in which Fenrir and the rest of Redhammer saved the hostages from. This helicopter starts to unload a barrage of bullets at the tower, taking out many of these recruits. Vigil gets hit by a piece of debris and gets knocked out in the process, and this is when Ram has to step up. Ram, using her weapons and her boogie device, manages to evade this helicopter and eventually takes it down. Vigil managed to regain himself after being knocked out, and him and Ram continue to investigate. They start to make their way down to the base of the tower. Vigil is visibly bleeding, and Ram turns to him and asks, "You're hurt. Are you okay? You were limping back there." Vigil begins to speak and says, "Don't worry about that. What about you? You lost your squad mate." And then we can see Ram thinking back to that moment in the cinematic where Angel, that's her English name, fell off the building after her rope was shot by the helicopter. She continues by saying, "I'm good to go," and Vigil chimes in by saying, "You'd better be." He continues by saying, "Because I just got confirmation that helicopter was sent by Deimos. We don't know if he sent anyone else. When those doors open, I need to know you've got my 6. I said I'm good to go," says Ram. The elevator door swings open and Vigil and Ram draw their weapons, and here they are met what seems to be a Rainbow drone, but this drone isn't being operated by Rainbow. Does this mean that Deimos has some stolen Rainbow tech, including these drones? We can see that there are multiple mass figures shooting at Ram and Vigil behind cover. We can see the helicopter, which was destroyed in the cinematic, as well as one of these soldiers using a laptop, and there's bullets being exchanged with both sides. "There, the black SUVs, you see them?" says Vigil. "Affirmative," replies Ram. "Those are where most of our tangos are firing from. And the heli? Looks like they're searching for something. How are they following our movements so effectively? They're drone operator. I can take him out, but I need a distraction. Got anything?" "Yeah, I've got something," says Ram. Vigil goes on to say, "Once he's down, we'll still be outnumbered, but our crossfire should overwhelm them." "I'm ready," says Ram. "Good. Let's move." Ram then places down her boogie, starts to line it up, and detonates it. The boogie starts to make its way to the SUVs, and this is when all of these enemies start to draw the attention on the boogie. As this is happening, we can see the drone operator looking at their laptop, and it seems like Vigil was actually cloaked on her camera, as you can see him start to appear behind them. And before this operator even has a time to react, Vigil takes them out. This is when Ram also swings a corner, causing these enemies to be pinched between Vigil and Ram. However, one of these enemies were still alive and were about to take out Vigil. This is when Ram pops the canister off her boogie, causing an explosion, which disorientates this enemy, and then he is then finally taken out. We then get a little sit rep from Vigil saying, "Nothing over here." Ram says, "Found something. It's what they were trying to extract." And we can see it's a little device that was being held in a backpack. We then cut to 6 days later at the Viperstrike headquarters, where we can see Solace, Rook, and Mira testing some armor. Mira takes a shot at one of the dummies wearing, I assume, Rook's chest piece, and Rook goes to analyze the damage. Mira questions him about the outcome by saying, "And?" And Rook replies by saying, "Like a hot knife through butter." Mira, "Extraordinary." Extraordinary? No, Deimos having this kind of ordnance is anything but that. Rook replies by saying, "I meant it more like merde, Solace," which I believe is sort of just like French term for shit. "Shit indeed," she replies. Mira goes on to say, "And these bullets were made using the forensics evidence we recovered. The real things are probably more powerful. Even with a vest, Harry wouldn't have stood a chance." Just as we finish this sentence, Ram enters the room to the shock of Mira. "I'm very sorry to interrupt," she says. "Great to meet you in person," says Mira. Mira goes on to introduce some of the operators. She says, "This is Solace, who arrived this morning, and Rook, a member of Viperstrike squad." Both of them greet Ram, Rook doing it in French, and Solace actually doing it in Korean. "You speak Korean?" Ram asks Solace. "Just the basics. I love languages." "Do you have the black boxes?" Solace asks. "Yes, the flight data, recorder, and cockpit voice recorder recovered from the helicopter." We then cut to later this day as Solace is trying to work with this black box and find some information. "Well, good news and bad news," she says. "Start with the bad," says Mira. "Most of it I can't recover," replies Solace. "Damage?" "No, there's an additional layer of encryption the Sunset R&D prototype isn't able to decipher." "Please tell me the good news is something we can work with," says Ram. "Cheon-sa and other recruits, they paid for this with their lives." "I know, and there is something, Ram. It seems the helicopter took off from a commercial freight ship called the Heartbreaker, which is now moored off the coast of Portugal. Wolfguard has a team there now. They'll be able to deploy quickly," says Mira. And finally, Solis says, there's one more thing. The recording mentions a special operation. What we find in Portugal may help us understand what Deimos is targeting next. Next, here is the Battle Pass story and lore which came with Operation Heavy Metal, and it goes as follows. Logically, I know it wasn't my fault, but this feeling remains. My friend is gone forever, and I can sketch, I can listen to music, I can train, but she's still not coming back. Deimos deserves a fate worse than the ones his victims at Tower met with. You attack us like that, you sign your own death warrant. I don't care how strong an enemy appears, we do not stop. When you're redhammer, there is no such thing as an immovable object. We're coming. So that was Ram's perspective on the entire attack which happened on Tower, and now we're going to move into the descriptions of some of the items in the Battle Pass. And we're going to start with this one by IQ. Now the reason why I think this one by IQ is extremely interesting is because IQ isn't part of Rainbow. She left to work for Nighthaven, and we haven't really heard anything from her since she left. And what she says is, Vigil, I know you won't read this, but what happened wasn't your fault. I'm here if you need me. So that shows that IQ still cares about her former colleagues, and she maybe feels that Vigil might feel a bit guilty since he was the one training these operators when the attack happened. And I find this very interesting because if I'm not wrong, this is the first time any ex-Rainbow operative that went to join Nighthaven has actually made contact to a Rainbow operator. I know Callie last Battle Pass was saying that she hoped Ash recovers, but I'm talking the operators which were core Rainbow ops then left to join Nighthaven. And what we could take from this as well is it seems like IQ has maybe went and talked to Callie to maybe sort of intervene with the whole Deimos situation. And this is supported by the next description, which is a little quote from Callie, and she says, trust me, WIZE, we will act when the risk doesn't outweigh the gain. So the way I interpret that is either two ways. That first one from IQ was a message she maybe went to send to Rainbow, and Callie maybe seen that message, and this is where the response is coming from. Or after sending that message, IQ went and talked to Callie, who is the leader of Nighthaven, and is basically like, look, maybe we should step in here. And that is when Callie gives a reply saying that, yeah, we'll step in when the risk doesn't outweigh the gain. We'll step in when we're gaining something from this, and we're not putting our lives at risk. I don't know, to me, it kind of sounds like IQ is wishing that they would step in a little bit. And it seems like IQ isn't the only ex-Rainbow operator who joined Nighthaven to have this feeling. This one for Smoke is actually talking to Ella, and he says, your sister's recovered, Ella. Why are you still so tense? But what we get from this is that 1, Zofia did recover, 2, Ella did know that Zofia was attacked, and 3, it upset Ella. This next one is just a very simple one by Thorn talking about Ram, and all she says is, absolute unit. Because Ram is an absolute unit, both in the lore and in game. This next one is by Ram herself, and she says, a good soldier masters her feelings. Vengeance is patient. And I feel like a really cool dynamic with this quote by Ram is when you look at the situation with Azami. Since it is said that she is trying to jump the gun a little bit and really wants to take Deimos out. So it's interesting seeing Azami and Ram who both want vengeance, but it seems Ram is a bit more calm and collected. I mean, maybe not in the cinematic, but definitely now. Whereas Azami, it seems like maybe she's getting a bit more on edge and really wants to take him out. This next one is by Kaze, another redhammer operator. Of course, Ram is in redhammer, and he says, tarantulas are perfect predators. Adding one to redhammer is a stroke of genius. Now, the reason why he says that is because Tarantula is the name of her battalion, that is where she's from. But I also just really think it's funny that Kaze is once again being showcased in this battle pass, because he was in the last one as well. When Fenrir joined redhammer, of course both Ram and Fenrir are part of the same squad, and in this Kaze is like, you know, stroke of genius, she's amazing, bring her on this team, is absolutely brilliant. But then when it comes to Fenrir, he's like, this guy shouldn't be here, I don't trust this guy. It's quite funny having a season apart where Kaze, you know, really has these differing views on both these operators due to the background they have both came from. But Kaze doesn't call the shots in redhammer, Captain Thermite does, and we actually have a little bit by Thermite himself. And what he says is, Sledge, Ash, Harry. There's only one way this ends, and for that to happen, the whole team's got to align. Now, of course, he's only talking about Sledge and Ash when it comes to operators, because the other operators which are on that mission, Kivera and Zofia, aren't part of his team. He's focusing on redhammer in this statement. Of course, Harry is a little bit of an exception since he overlooked everyone. But we do know the states of Sledge and Ash. Sledge did recover, and as far as we're aware, Ash is still in a coma. And Harry, I'm sure you all are aware, was eliminated by Deimos. So Thermite talking about the whole team aligning is a big thing, especially with Fenrir being in the mix, and a lot of people kind of liking him. him, and a lot of people kind of not liking him and not trusting him. So he really needs to sort redhammer out. Now this one is from Vigil, and he is talking about Ram, and he says, Ram let her emotions take control at tower. Positive outcome, yes, but it's not a habit she should indulge in again. And I do agree, especially soldiers of this caliber should be able to control their emotion. However, I'll take Ram's defense here. There was a helicopter attacking the building, it killed her friends, and I think her response was pretty reasonable. However, it is a bad habit to get into, as we have seen many times. Acting on your emotions can lead to failure. Next up, we have a little bit by Amaru, and she says, loss can be disorientating, but can also provide clarity and purpose. I wish Ram the latter. And here we just have another redhammer operative showing her condolences for Ram and the event which happened at the tower, and it is just interesting to hear from Amaru. Also, the talk of loss can be traced to her backstory. She did have hope that her great-grandfather would return one day despite going missing years ago, and as well as this, she did grow really close with Goyo, who lost his family in an explosion. All of this stuff shaping them to the people they will become, and in her words, providing them clarity and purpose. Next up, we have Melissi, and what she says is, the feeling you have like something's been ripped from you, hold on to that. Let it be the reason you never give up. A big part of Melissi's story is that she's anti-poaching. She saves animals from these very dangerous poachers who, just like she says, will rip, these baby animals away from their families just to harvest their tusks and stuff like that, especially endangered ones. And the fact that she was once ambushed, which basically destroyed her unit, she's had a lot of stuff ripped from her in her past, and she understands how it feels on other creatures as well. So she can definitely sympathize in that sense. Next up, we have a little bit from Castle, and he says, for someone who breaks down defenses, Ram sure is guarded. Not a very deep one, but a pretty good observation. I like a lot of the time when they compare the operator's gadget to their personality. Now, the next one we have is by Fenrir. Really interesting hearing about him since he is only a season old at this point, but he is of course another redhammer operator alongside Ram, so it does make sense that we could hear a little bit from him. And what he says is, Choi's actions at the tower may have seemed reckless, but my training tells me she was in total control. And by his training, I assume his redhammer training, which is why maybe him and Vigil have different opinions on this, since Vigil is part of Ghosteyes and Fenrir is part of redhammer, so maybe Fenrir knows a little bit more of the redhammer way than Vigil does. This next one is just a little bit by Ram reflecting on her past, and she says, in the orphanage, I fought alone. In Rainbow, we fight as one. Just a really nice little reflection. Next up, we have one by Frost, and she says, when you're hunting big game, you don't just fire wildly, you lay a trap. And of course, I believe she is talking about Deimos, and that is how she would like to take him out. Rather than trying to hunt him down with little bits of information, you lead Deimos to them. Just like how he went after the tower, they could, provide him some false information, he goes to attack it, and Rainbow get the upper hand. We know how important traps are in this game, and that mindset may work. Next up, we have a little bit by Dokubi, and she says, no one should have known the training location. We have a vulnerability, a back door that needs closing. So if what Dokubi is saying is true, that means the guy that Fenrir was talking to in the comic should not have known that the tower existed. Could someone inside of Yahata Data Security know about Deimos and be working for Deimos? I mean, that could maybe explain how they knew that Yahata was going through that market that one day. It seems like there is a bigger conspiracy here. I guess that just depends on how you interpret this one, but there could be more of a story here. This one's a little bit funny, and it's just Mozzie talking about this charm, and he says, well, I'll be a tiger on a frag grenade. It's also kind of funny that Mozzie's saying this since his gadget is like a little spider jumping on drones. This is a tiger jumping on a grenade. It's a cool little dynamic. I'm not sure if they intended that, but if they did, that's, kind of funny. This next one by Nomad is something that I was wondering, and I'm glad that she's kind of confirmed it. And she says, multiple dead. Downtown Seoul is looking like a war zone. This is getting out of hand. And I feel like there's going to be a big response to this. I mean, Deimos before has been kind of attacking Rainbow in the background. The general public wasn't really aware that Rainbow was getting attacked. I guess they knew that Rainbow existed because of the stadium. So people do know that Rainbow exists. However, they didn't know that Deimos was attacking them. Well, they may not know that Deimos is attacking Rainbow, but they definitely know that someone has just attacked a tower in Seoul, a big city. I can't imagine that news aren't going to, report this one. This is probably going to be like a worldwide event. So the stakes have definitely gotten higher because Deimos is not only out of the shadows for Rainbow, He's seemingly out of the shadows of the world. This next one is by Gridlock, talking about the boogie, which is the gadget of Ram. As she did the device evaluation of that, you'll see that in the full Ram lore video. But what she says is, field testing the boogie has been the most expensive one we've ever run, but worth every penny. And this is very fitting for her, since we do know that she does enjoy going to these robot bot fights in her free time. It's something she's passionate about. So having her, you know, a little bit obsessed with the boogie makes a lot of sense, because that thing is like straight out of Robot Wars. This next one's a little funny, and it's by Flores, and it says, I spent ages making this for her, yet Dokkaebi says it still isn't spicy enough. So it seems like Flores is, you know, cooking up some special food for the Rainbow Operatives. Of course, he's a chef, I guess it would make sense. I just like that little dynamic. It's quite fun, and they've played into that part of Flores. That Spanner one is interesting. It includes a lot of his backstory, and he says, when you lose someone undercover, you grieve in secret. It's a kindness we can openly mourn those lost at the tower. That is because, in his story, Bandit did go undercover inside of the gang, which operates from the map known as Clubhouse. I'm thinking of doing a separate lore video for that in the future, but Bandit is very well known for being a very good undercover operative. Now we have a few here which sort of plays into the dynamic of Vigil and Mozzie. If you don't know, Vigil hates Mozzie. He said it on multiple occasions. He absolutely hates that man. So this first one is by Mozzie, and he says, this is the first time he's taken a leadership role since the Invitational. He didn't deserve what happened at Tower. And by the way, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't really seem like Mozzie dislikes Vigil. It seems to be a very one-sided hate relationship. Mozzie seems to always try and cozy up to Vigil and maybe kind of be nice to him, but Vigil seemingly just doesn't like him. As we see with this next one, this is also a Vigil in-game face reveal, but he says, is this a joke to Mozzie? Recruits died and he bakes me a meat pie? So it seems like Mozzie is just trying to comfort Vigil. I really hope we learn more about this dynamic, and I really want to learn why Vigil truly hates Mozzie so much. And the final one we have here is by Vigil yet again, and he says, keep the Swede away from me, I'm not doing another psych eval. Of course, when he says the Swede, he's referring to Fenrir. Fenrir popping his head up once again in the story. I feel like Ubisoft are going to use Fenrir quite a lot, and I'm all for it. He's one of my favorite characters already, and I can't wait to see more of him. And with the end of Operation Heavy Metal, we move into Operation Deep Freeze. It is here where we see our Wolfguard squad, which is deployed in Portugal, which was previously mentioned in the Heavy Metal comic, and this consists of Thunderbird and a brand new Wolfguard operative called Tuberau. Using the intel which was found from the attack on Tower, they managed to track down the Heartbreaker cargo ship. And following a group of soldiers which were deployed from the ship, this would lead Tuberau and Thunderbird to Deimos' lair. And it is here where we will learn the organization in which Deimos operates, the Kaze Legion. And it turns out the Kaze Legion had some hostages at the lair. And despite the best efforts of our operators, they were too late to save these hostages. However, there is a major piece of intel in which they do find. The next place in which Deimos is targeting is Emerald Plains. And this is directly followed by the comic book. So this comic book starts with Thunderbird and Tuberau after they have infiltrated Deimos' lair, and this is of course on the coast of Portugal. So Tuberau starts off by saying, I'm almost through the firewall, Thunderbird. Damn, I'm in, we should hurry. Anything we can use? Asked Thunderbird. Deimos left hours ago. He's already on his way to Emerald Plains. Thunderbird starts reading some of the information on the monitors, and it says, eliminate high value target. Who's he trying to? And then she is cut off by a speedboat, saying, hostiles inbound, Tuberau. We need to get out of here. We can't have a repeat of the tower. Doc needs to know. Tuberau tries to contact Doc, however their comms are being jammed by something. Looking up at the escape route through the top of the cave, Thunderbird says, my chopper can get us clear of the interference. That's a long climb, we'd be easy targets, says Tuberau. Any other suggestions? Their boat. We take it and go. So Thunderbird and Tuberau make their way over to the dock, and you can see some of the Kaze members standing over at the other side. Thunderbird and Tuberau swing the corner and take out a few of these enemies, and now there's a full-blown gunfight happening. A bullet flies past Tuberau's head, and that is when he learns that they have been flanked by someone else. This member of Kaze looking different to the other ones. Kaze foda, suppress his fire, I'll take care of the others, says Tuberau. Tuberau then throws his nitro cell and takes out a few enemies. However, that is when he is actually shot in his shoulder. Thunderbird and this mysterious Kaze member, who looks quite interesting, he seems to be wearing some sort of a ghillie suit on his head, start engaging in a fight. He manages to knock Thunderbird's gun out of her hand, however she charges him with a knife and stabs him in the chest. This is when Tuberau gets back up and also charges into them. As this mysterious Kaze member falls back, he sort of propels himself back off the wall and charges Tuberau, taking him into the water. Both bleeding out, this Kaze member tries to take Tuberau down with him, however that is when Tuberau places his Zoto canister on this Kaze member and causes him to freeze. And as you can see, when his body rises to the surface, he is completely frozen. That was A lot, says Tubarão. Let's go. I don't want to be here when more reinforcements show up. Can you drive one of these? Tubarão asks. It's not my bird, but I'll manage. You patch up. It is here when we see Thunderbird and Tubarão making their way to the Heartbreaker. This is the ship in which the helicopter which attacked Tower launched from. Doc, come in. This is Thunderbird. They seem to get a connection this time, and Doc says, I hear you, Thunderbird. What happened in there? That was Deimos' base of operations. We found intel. He's on his way to Emerald Plains. And that is when we cut to Doc, Rook, and Mira at Hereford Base. Emerald Plains? Why? Says Doc. Mission statement was HVT elimination. HVT stands for high value target. Shouting over to Rook and Mira, Doc says, get the transport ready, we need to move. Tubarão then asks Doc, Captain, what can we do? Doc replies by saying, get back to base and tell the others. Emerald Plains is a dark site used by the Council. If Deimos knows, Rainbow could be at risk. The Council? Says Tubarão. He's going after our oversight committee. I'm sorry we couldn't get this to you sooner. And the comic ends by Doc saying, don't be. You gave us a shot. Now we just have to take him down. And that comic book explains why Emerald Plains is important to Rainbow. It's a dark site used by their overseeing committee, so this includes the politicians above Rainbow, and that's who Deimos is seemingly going after. But we also get to learn some of the methods Deimos will be using thanks to the map Lair, which coincides with this story, where there are 3 separate different audio files you can find on this map. And as well as this, we'll be taking a look at the Battle Pass lore for this season as well, where it'll be giving us more information. So this first voice recording can be found in the Master Office site on the 2nd floor. This is Deimos' office, and in one of the open drawers, we can find Harry's voice recorder, which we've seen him use before in different cinematics. Even all the way back in the Hammer and Scalpel cinematic, where he was interviewing Dokkaebi, this is Harry's recorder. So just think about how much information is on this. Deimos definitely learned a lot about our operators from stealing this, and specifically what we hear on this is Harry's final day. I'm going to let this entire recording play out, and then we're going to come back and talk about it.
1:40 a.m. With last year's funding cuts, we cannot operate at the level we need. I've stated my case again and again, but my concern falls on deaf ears. I can only hope that what wakes them up isn't a great tragedy. 2:22 a.m. Filed a declassification request for files related to early Rainbow missions. They're routinely redacted, but it's the only way I can connect the dots. To find out who Deimos really is. Putting a name to a face may not stop him, but when you know the why, you can begin to find the weaknesses. 4:04 a.m. Just doesn't make sense. There's only one clear candidate, but now I need to go back over my notes, over the files, because it doesn't add up. It's not possible that 8:29 a.m. Searching for the real identity of this Deimos. A piece of evidence will point one direction, but another suggests the opposite. Whoever he is a master of subterfuge. And he's been hiding for a long, long time. 12:43 p.m. Deimos has all the hallmarks of being a former Rainbow operative. Like everyone here, he is a force to be reckoned with. But when freed of the bounds of morality and protocol, he becomes much more dangerous. Which is why I'm not as confident as usual that if he comes after us, we'll be able to hold our own. 1:22 p.m. Rainbow has been in somewhat of a crisis recently. I sense instability amongst the operators, infighting. I try to be as strong a leader as I can, but I lead with the mind, and sometimes I wonder if that will always be enough. 3:33 p.m. The captains have all been so focused on Nighthaven recently that I worry it's led the unit as a whole to be too single-minded. Intelligence has been warning of something much bigger on the horizon. We can't afford to miss it. 8:19 p.m. Every good leader knows authority must be passed on eventually. I've done what I can. Changed the culture for the better. But it cannot always be me. There are many who could quite ably fill my shoes. 10:01 p.m. To do this job well, you have to give everything over to it. I'm coming to terms with the fact that other areas of my life have been greatly neglected. One day I hope to make it up to her. Hello?
So, one absolutely insane recording. The timeline of events seems to be going throughout a 24-hour period. It doesn't seem like Harry got any sleep over this 24-hour period since he was up investigating Deimos. And this eventually leads up into when Deimos enters his house, and you all know how that story ends. But yeah, a lot of stuff we can take from this. For starters, we learned that Rainbow had budget cuts, and Harry was worried that it was going to take a big event for them to sort of get that budget back. And clearly it did. It took him. Ash is in a coma. Many of our operators were injured, and Deimos is a threat. We learned at 2:22 AM, Harry put in a declassification request for old early Rainbow missions in an attempt to sort of put the dots together to discover Deimos' identity. Moving on to 4 AM, he seemingly has came to a decision of who it could possibly be, but Harry doesn't want to believe that, so he isn't settled on it, but it seems like he was on the right path at least and had a potential candidate. We don't learn who that candidate was, but it was definitely someone important because it really took Harry back and forced him to go over his notes once again. And it sort of cuts out in the end because he's like, it's not possible that, and then it cuts off, implying that he said the name of Deimos, and Deimos has clearly cut this out when he got the recorder so it doesn't leak out. So we were very close to hearing a name there. Still in the morning at 8:29 AM, Harry claims that there is a lot of conflicting evidence. One piece points towards one person and then another piece points to someone else. Now roughly around midday at 12:43 PM, Harry confirms that Deimos does have the characteristics of a former operative, implying the worry he has about an operator being that skilled as the operators he trains, being able to act without moral, and he even says he's not confident that they could stand against this. At 1:22 PM, he talks about crisis and instability amongst the operators, and he wonders if the way that he leads them is enough. At 3:33 PM, he talks about how these squad leaders are a bit too focused on Nighthaven, and he feels like something bigger is brewing in the background. Roughly around 8:19 PM, he talks about on how he's going to have to pass on authority one day, implying that he's tried to change the culture for the better, and that this position will not always be him forever. At 10 PM, he talks about how much time it takes to do this role and do this job, and he's been neglecting some other stuff in his life, primarily his relationship with his wife, and he says he hopes to make it up to her one day. But unfortunately, we know he would never get that chance. And the final bit we hear of Harry is very ominous. It's actually quite scary, and it's at an unknown time of the night, simply him calling out hello after he hears someone enter his property, and we all know who that is. And so that was the audio recordings by Harry on his final day, and he was investigating Deimos, and it seems like Deimos knew this. Maybe after Harry pulled up the old files and asked for declassification, Deimos might have been aware that he's done this, and that is how he knew that Harry was getting into his identity, and it's the perfect time to strike, whilst the other operators are focused on the stolen Nighthaven gear, which was bait. Now, if we move down a floor to the medical room, we actually have an audio recording by the on-site doctor at Deimos' lair. Again, I'm going to let this play out and then we'll talk about it after.
3 patients with identical symptoms died this week. When I told Deimos, he didn't even flinch. He seemed oddly unsurprised, as if it was his plan. He told me he looked forward to the autopsy results. 4 patients this week presenting with identical symptoms: nausea, headache, and claiming to hear a piercing noise accompanied by extreme inner pain. The cause is undetermined. Autopsy results of the deceased personnel show a foreign biological agent present in the lungs. I've never seen anything like it before, but I worry this has something to do with the research lab. I've requested access to lab files so I can begin to understand what it is I'm dealing with. If I knew what they were working on, I could begin to develop a treatment program rather than letting our staff continue to suffer. I've requested a meeting with Deimos today. I plan to tell him everything I know.
Now, firstly, we learned that a lot of Deimos' men are having reactions to some biochemical weapons. Multiple patients on separate different occasions were coming back with identical symptoms, in which the doctor says is undetermined of what it could be. And Deimos actually seemed quite interested by this and was excited to see the autopsy after the outcome of these people being affected by these biochemical weapons. The autopsy report did show a foreign agent involved, and this is why the doctor sort of tried to reach reach out to the lab to see if she can understand what they are doing there, so she can also help them by the ones who are getting infected by it. It does seem like Deimos is developing all these biochemical weapons with no regard of how the effect has on his own soldiers. Is actually quite happy that some of them are dying to it so we can get a greater understanding of it. And that is why the doctor is requesting access to lab files so she can help the men she's there to save, because they are creating weapons which, you know, even is affecting them. This was a big issue with the white masks and the practices they used, and it seems like Deimos is going to be even a bigger threat than they are. This is like the threat of the white masks, but led by an ex-Rainbow operative, which has more training than any white mask member ever did. And by the end of this, the way the doctor says that she's going to schedule a meeting with Deimos and tell him everything she knows, the way she says that implies that it's like, Deimos, I know what you're doing. This isn't right. So the fate of this doctor, I worry for. I have a feeling that she may be no longer with us. Now, talking about the lab, we can go to the very basement floor and go into the lab itself and hear an audio recording by one of the scientists in this lab. And she sounds, dare I say it, evil. Take a listen.
My thesis advisor put so many restrictions on my experiments, stunting my progress. But no longer. Working for Deimos will lead to the development of some incredibly advanced tech, not to mention weaponry. There's been so much discussion regarding the fear toxin and what its loss represents. But we have many other weapons in development. It was just the first of many. Battlefield implications of our latest research could shift the tides of any war. If all continues to plan, we won't just be in chemistry textbooks, we'll be in history ones. Deimos is adamant that I recreate the FNAT fear toxin, but Fenrir destroyed everything. If I don't somehow find a way to satisfy Deimos' request, I know what will happen. I must keep going. Most draw the line at human subjects, but we aren't held back by such restrictions. It took some getting used to, but I could never go back to the stale establishment world after this. Those that were lost during the FNAT testing phase were the unfortunate cost of progress. It could have been any of us, and we'd all understand the necessity of that cost. It's why we're here. We believe in something bigger.
So we learn a lot of things from this in standard scientific research and in the scientific world. A lot of her theses were restricted by people above her. But with Deimos, there's no restriction. They're allowed to use human subjects and test these biochemical weapons they are developing, which is extremely scary stuff. She does mention the loss of the fear toxin, which is the FNAT dreadmine developed by Fenrir, and we do learn that Fenrir destroyed everything left defected to Rainbow. By the way, if you don't know, the version of the dreadmine we use in-game is an altered version which is harmless, and that is the version in which Rainbow uses. That's the version in which Fenrir uses, not the very dangerous version in which Deimos was making him develop. The Rainbow version just causes a little hallucination to decrease your sight. But yeah, she did say the loss of the dreadmine, wasn't good. However, that they have more chemical weapons in development, so the dreadmine was just one of them. And Deimos actually wants the dreadmine to be remade as well, implying that there is going to be consequences if she doesn't do it. I imagine Deimos is going to do a Deimos thing and probably take her out, so a lot of pressure. But as well as this, it sort of seemed like she was bragging as well that people were lost during the testing. Scientists were lost, these lab workers were lost, saying that it's sort of just another step in the process. No care for human life at all. So yeah, they are developing more chemical weapons. There's actually a room down here called Toxin, and as you can see, there is this unknown gadget being made here, which I think we may see in the lore very soon. And I'm sure Deimos isn't going to limit the use to these on Rainbow itself. There's going to be more victims. And she also said that the research they are doing will go down in the history books. That is how big the stuff they are developing is. And now the final piece of lore we have for Year 8 of Rainbow Six Siege is the Battle Pass lore for Operation Deep Freeze, and it starts off as follows. This has the brand new Operator Tubarau talking about Deimos, and he says the following. This Deimos, he raised an army, the Kires Legion. They were at Tower, they were at Lair. Why does it feel like we're playing catch up? We can take them face to face, but if they're always one step ahead, all we can do is hope to handle the fallout. This means more lost lives. I never thought of myself as a big fish in a small pond, but when the bigger fish come snapping, sometimes you need a bigger boat. We have to give our all at every step if we want to survive this threat. So now we know he's headed to Emerald Plains. With that intel in hand, we can stop Deimos for good. If only I could go, but there's no time. And if you did see my video about the comic book for this season, we do know that Tubarão and Thunderbird relayed this information to Doc, who is currently at Hereford Base, which is in England. Rook and Mira were also there as well, and considering that Emerald Plains is in Northern Ireland, that means that Doc, Rook, and Mira, and we don't know if there's any more operators there yet, they're the closest to Emerald Plains, so they'll probably be the first operators there, meaning that we'll probably see them in the Year 9 cinematic. However, let's deep dive into the different parts of this battle pass and see what lore is in it. So this first one by Sam Fisher, which I find really interesting, says, "The pattern of these strikes, I feel I've seen his work before. Too bad there's no time to dig deeper." And with that sentence, that opens up so much stuff on who Deimos could be. Now, we do know Deimos is ex-Rainbow. However, does this sort of hint at the fact that Deimos was a prominent Rainbow figure years ago, potentially an ex-director? And that is how Sam Fisher, a veteran soldier, is starting to notice patterns and think that he potentially has seen him work before. This next one is Deimos talking himself. I don't believe we've ever seen this in a battle pass before. And he says, "On the field, soldiers don't have the luxury of politics. Decisiveness is all that matters." Which honestly really goes into my theory that he was the Rainbow director, because he's saying that decisiveness is all that matters, and if you need to make controversial decisions, that's what a soldier has to do. And as well as this, he is targeting Rainbow's overseeing committee at Emerald Plains, which would include politicians. So it seems he's trying to eliminate that part as well of Rainbow. And this next one is by Nomad, and she says, "Can't remember the last time I went on a proper trip. Maybe Tubarão can take Twitch and I on a boat." So yes, Nomad is known for being very adventurous. She went on multiple expeditions. That was something that is a massive part of her story. And I guess judging by this, since she joined Rainbow, she's not really done many big expeditions since I guess she doesn't have the time for it. And I believe she's maybe talking about Twitch as well, because it does seem like Twitch is sort of overworking herself a little bit, which you'll see later on in this battle pass. We have one by Tubarão here, and he says, "The best part of joining Wolfguard is not having to argue about how much civilians matter. That's because Wolfguard is the humanitarian squad, and it seems like Tubarão has maybe had an issue with this in the past, where the people he's been working with don't really have the care for civilian lives as much as he does." This next one is by Warden, and he says, "It's not your fault, kid. You did what you could. It's hard enough protecting one person, let alone a whole boatload full of them." And the line, "it's hard enough protecting one person," can be applied to pretty much all these operators, but especially since he was in the Secret Service and was in charge of protecting the president, that one line can specifically be applied to that as well. So also nice to hear from Warden. We don't really hear much about him in the lore currently. This next one we have Tubarão talking to Fuse, and he says, "For the last time, no. I will not help you make a naval version of the Matryoshka. Explosives should only be a last resort." And of course, the Matryoshka is the name of his gadget. We typically call it the cluster charge, but it's actually named after the little Russian nesting dolls. And it seems like Fuse has been maybe wanting to make a different version of it, specifically a naval version. And that is Fuse coming from the redhammer squad being a bit more explosive heavy, whereas Tubarão, part of the humanitarian one, Wolfguard, is being more like explosives should be a last resort. But to be honest, given all the things which are currently happening, I'm on Fuse's side. I think explosives should come first. Next up we have Clash, again an operator we typically don't see much in the lore, and she says, "Some missions can't be boiled down to this is the guy making trouble. Sometimes you have to take a step back and look at the big picture." And this one is also very fitting for Clash as well, since she was a police officer in London and that's where she came from. And this is her giving her perspective sort of from that more police mindset, where you can't really boil it down to one perpetrator and there's always a bigger picture. We have yet another one by Clash as well, and she says, "You chose the blade, I chose the shield. Let's talk about anger, Azami. It doesn't have to consume you." Now, you can sort of coincide this with the previous one for Clash as well, and maybe think that she was also addressing Azami with that statement as well. But it is quite interesting that this is another battle pass in which people have sort of told Azami that vengeance typically may not be the best path for her. Especially with the whole bigger picture thing being that Azami and Rainbow initially thought it was Nighthaven who killed Yahata, and it turned out not to be. But this just gives us that little reminder as to why Azami is even in Rainbow. She was there to avenge Yahata. She was there to stop whoever done this. And that person is Deimos. And it's clear that she still has that anger. This next one is by Ram, and it's just a little sentence saying, "Hold on to what you care about, Tubarão. Never let it go. It's just nice to hear the operator, which came out before Tubarão, just talking to him. I do like it when they include recent operators in these battle passes talking to the new ones, because although they are still part of the same team, it sort of feels like a little bit of passing the torch, and it shows that these new operators, even though they are still very fresh to the team, are also still part of that team. They're still here to welcome the new recruits. It's just a nice little addition, I think. Now this next one is by Mira, and this is the first of a few in this battle pass where some Rainbow operators are sort of talking about how they kind of want Nighthaven back a little bit. This starts with Mira saying, "I'm doing my best to keep our gear cutting edge. I hate to admit it, but having Osa here would get better results. I could use her vision." And this is especially coming after the comic book in Operation Heavy Metal, where we see Mira and Rook testing out some of the gear in which they have taken from the tower attack and showing how strong the bullets in which Deimos and the Kira's Legion are using. So I can imagine after her seeing the gear which Deimos has, and her being sort of the main person in Rainbow which is developing this gear, she's probably thinking of how a little bit behind she might feel now. And like she says in this, having Osa, who develops all the gadgets for Nighthaven, would probably be helpful. And this is clearly setting up the fact that Rainbow and Nighthaven need each other. Right now, it seems that Rainbow need Nighthaven more than the other side, so I really think we do need to see what happens to Nighthaven to sort of warrant them wanting Rainbow back as well. This next one is by Ayana, and she says, "Jaeger says humans know more about space than the ocean. Every voyage is a risk, so why do we do it? To marvel or to control?" And that's quite an interesting insight by Ayana, who herself has been to space. That is why she has her gadget, that's so she can explore the moon whilst being in the space station. It just seems to be quite a nice little interaction between Jaeger and Ayana. Now this next one is Goyo talking about Harry, and he says, "I do miss Harry. He knew that Rainbow needs its specialists to understand each other. The why is more important than the how." It's really nice to see that almost even a year on, Harry is still popping up in the lore, and people are still talking about him. If you haven't seen my video about all the voice recordings you can find on Lair, you can find Harry's voice recorder on his final day, setting up to when Deimos enters his house. I recommend watching the video for that. Right, this next one is by Zofia, and this is yet another Rainbow operator talking about how they kind of want Nighthaven back. She says, "With the danger we face, our issues with Nighthaven feel trivial. We could certainly use their resources." Of course, Zofia was there when Deimos first attacked the operators, she was there when Ash was put in the coma, and it's clear that she does want Nighthaven back as well, but I wonder if this is also because Ella is there, of course her sister. When she's saying we could certainly use their resources, Ella is one of their resources, she's one of their soldiers. Maybe I'm looking too much into what she's saying here, but I can't imagine that she doesn't want Ella back to some extent, because I really do hope that we see those two reunite once again. This next one is a little bit by Frost saying, "The unknown is terrifying to most. To have hope when you don't know if your next day will be your last, that takes courage." And what she's saying here really reminds me of Harry in that cinematic, when Deimos was basically talking about everything that he was going to do, how this is the end of Rainbow and how he's going to stop them. Harry had the courage. He talked about how it's their unit now and how they're stronger, and he went out with courage. I think a lot of what Frost is saying can be applied to what happened there. This next one is by Buck, and he says, "Deimos, like his namesake, is a myth. There is a mortal man behind that mask. Remember that." I definitely think this is quite an interesting thing for Ubisoft to put in, especially at Year 8 Season 4, when we're going into a big cinematic in Year 9, and they're talking about how there is a man behind that mask. Since a big thing a lot of us are potentially expecting is an identity or face reveal for Deimos. And in universe, Buck is reminding people of that. There is still a man there, one that bleeds like anyone else. This next one is Thatcher, and he says, "Bullets and blades get most jobs done, but even if I have to admit it, the most dangerous enemies require swankier tools than I've got." And I believe this might be referencing the hammer and scalpel animation, in which Thatcher's sort of more like old-fashioned, forget that technology, I disable it all, I use bullets and blades. Whereas Dokubi was more like, we can use electronics to our advantage and use technology against the enemies, even their own technology. And it seems like Thatcher has definitely warmed up to that side of it, which is really nice character development for him. Here's another one by Sam Fisher, and he says, "Training never ends. If you're not sharp, you're dead. What keeps you sharp, specialist?" I can imagine he's talking to Tubarão, or he could just be talking to anyone out there. This could even be sort of like a meta one, where he's sort of talking to us. Of course, I mean in the way you can interpret it. The same way that how he would talk to these operators and how this is a true statement, this is a true statement for us as the players as well. If someone in this game is training better than you, they're learning the maps more, they're learning angles more, they're learning their aim better, then you're dead. They're the better player. This is especially fitting on a charm, which is SI 2024. Next up, we have this little petri dish. And something you notice in this battle pass about the wolfguard items, you've seen it for Clash and you'll see it for the Twitch one as well, is that it's very biohazard chemical themed. I wonder if this is a hint about what we're going to see in the Year 9 cinematic, since we do know Deimos is developing chemical weapons. Or this is is simply just showing the side of Wolfguard right now, which is dealing with chemicals, purely just for the theme of this battle pass, just to show us a side of the Wolfguard squad in which we haven't seen before. But Captain Doc says, Deimos' approach reminds me of how antibodies behave towards unwanted substances in the body. Targeted, relentless, deadly. And it does give me sort of Rainbow Six Extraction vibes, however, that game isn't canon, the story never happened. That was purely a theoretical what-if situation. It didn't actually happen in the story. It was kind of just for fun to see how you could put Rainbow in a universe like that. Just because I see people confused sometimes, Extraction never happens in the story. Neither did the Outbreak event. This next one is Glaz, and he says, like a sculpture, you can only fully appreciate a situation by looking at it from all sides, even if some angles are less flattering. This seems to be along the lines of what Clash was talking about as well, how you need to look at the broader picture, and in this example by Glaz, you have to look at everything from the different sides and angles. This could just be a broad statement about anything, but I wonder if Ubisoft are talking about this, maybe looking at everything in the bigger picture by looking at games before Siege. That's going into a bit of theory territory, so I'm going to try and keep that out of this video, just not to bloat it. This next one is Thunderbird, of course an operator who went on that mission alongside Tubarão to the Lair, and she said, the sky and the sea bring us back to basics. Joy, freedom, hope. These are things worth fighting for. And like I was saying, how her and Tubarão went on that mission, they can both represent the sky and the sea. Thunderbird's real name is Mina Sky. She also flies a helicopter, a lot to do with flying and the sky itself. And Tubarão is Portuguese for shark, and he was also in the Navy. So you could look at the statement and say, Thunderbird and Tubarão bring joy, freedom, and hope. This next one is by Twitch, and she's saying, with only 2 operators on site, we're lucky we only lost the hostages. Deimos isn't giving us any breathing room. She's of course talking about the hostages you see in the cinematic for this season, in which Tubarão and Thunderbird were too late to save. And of course, they did make it out alive in the comic book we covered yesterday. Again, recommend checking out that video. It shows Thunderbird and Tubarão escaping the Lair. This one's from Lion talking about Twitch, and he says, Twitch has taken on so much. Coordinating, designing, maintaining, she feels responsible for Rainbow survival. And yeah, in the lore, Twitch does do a lot of stuff. She is also very skilled at designing gadgets. We did see when Sense first came out in that cinematic, she was in the command room alongside Doc. So it does seem like she is doing a lot. And I wonder if we will see her in the Year 9 cinematic with this little setup as well. Next up we have Legion, and just like Mira and Zofia, he is talking about Nighthaven. And this is him wearing that sort of exoskeleton suit which Nighthaven are known for making. Nighthaven make a lot of different exoskeleton suits. Kali's elite skin is one of them, so is Fink's elite skin. Heck, Nighthaven actually made Legion's elite skin when they first made their way into Rainbow. Well, here's another Nighthaven suit in which Legion is wearing. Of course, Legion is still at Rainbow, and he says, this is the last thing Osa designed before Nighthaven left. Remind me why we're mad at them again? So that is 3 Rainbow operators in this battle pass talking about how they sort of want Nighthaven back. Mira wants Osa's help, Zofia wants Nighthaven's resources, and Legion, again, also wants the stuff that Nighthaven made, in this case, Osa. Osa's a very important character. And so everyone, that was the complete lore of Year 8 of Rainbow Six Siege. Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about which operator this year was your favorite. I think mine was probably Fenrir. This will set you up for Year 9, and I am expecting maybe Emerald Plains to be attacked in the cinematic, but we're going to have to wait and see. Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Drop a like on this video if you did enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. I'll catch you later. I love you all. Stay safe. Peace.